All right, and just a few quick introductions. I'm Matthew Phillips. I teach history at Metro Campus. One of the co-organizers of this, along with John Roswell, who is a librarian at, where are you at, East?
Yep, Eastern Campus.
All right. And our presenters today are both from the library world. We have Megan Fowler and Nancy Weissman, who will be presenting, but I heard it on TikTok, media literacy and why you should be an information skeptic. I hope that this is fairly interactive. You can use the chat box in the right-hand side of your screen to leave questions. John will be keeping up with those questions and throwing them our way as we go. All righty, and with that, I believe Megan is up first.
Well, let me just share my screen really quickly. John, do we see my screen?
We see your screen.
Okay, excellent. So welcome. I am Assistant Professor Megan Fowler, librarian at the Metropolitan Campus of Cuyahoga Community College. Today, we're going to talk about media literacy, what they are, how they have evolved, give you some historical context of both media and media literacy, discuss some current implications for how media literacy affects us today, and then provide you some strategies for when you do engage with media, which you will find out is something that you do on a daily basis. So media literacy, what is it? Media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media in a variety of forms. So you may ask, what exactly is media? Media is any method in which a message is communicated. So any channel or platform. So what are some examples of media? You may recognize many of these logos. These are newspapers and magazines, which fall under media. Social media is a form of media. So things like Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. It's in the title, social media. Political advertisements and commercial advertisements as well. Also, movies, music, radio, etc. Again, any platform that can convey a message. So from these examples, you probably recognize many of them, and you probably realize that you interact with them multiple times on a daily basis. We are inundated with media. We consume it both actively when we sit and we scroll through Twitter or Facebook, but we also interact with it passively as well. So when you're sitting on the RTA and there are advertisements all around you, or if you walk into a doctor's office and the news is on in the background, you are constantly surrounded by media. To the tune of about 11.5 hours a day, you spend, the average US adult, engaging with media. The most consumed form of media still is television, and the average US adult spends 4.5 hours a day watching television. Social media is also a pretty big way in which we consume media. So 18 to 29-year-olds, 84% of them on average are active social media users. So constant, it's always there, we're always interacting. Now, media has been around for a very long time. It has its origins from the first time man took chisel to rock and created the first written message. So it's been around since most of humanity. Really, though, in the 19th century, media changed and it became mass media. This happened with the proliferation of newspapers. So newspapers had been around for centuries prior. However, in the 19th century, they became mass-produced, mass-consumed, and it became big business. These two gentlemen on your screen are William Randolph Hearst on the left and Joseph Pulitzer, two of the major newspaper tycoons of the 19th century. They owned publications all across the United States. Specifically, they were known for two New York publications, though, Hearst's New York Journal, and Pulitzer's New York World. They competed against each other to sell the most newspapers. It was big business, profits mattered. So how did they try to outsell each other and place profit over truth? Through sensational journalism. You may have heard the term yellow journalism. It has its origins in the 19th century, and it's basically the use of lurid features and sensationalized news in newspaper publishing with the intention to attract readers and increase circulation, aka make a profit. So we have some examples of headlines from, in this case, I believe this is the New York World, which would have been Pulitzer's publication.
Says no sense.
Okay. Back to this. So you have headlines from the 19th century that, in this case, woman jumps from Brooklyn Bridge, survives mad leap. We have a cartoon pictorial of this said event. In this case, this is an innocuous, not really broadly influential title. Hopefully no one took this as advice and decided to leap from the Brooklyn Bridge. But this is the type of titles you would see in circulation. This is what sells. Now, though, we have some other titles that are a little more, have greater implications. So in February of 1898, the USS Maine, which was a Navy ship, parked in the Havana harbor, exploded. Now, there was no concrete evidence for what happened. Was it accident? Was it subterfuge? Well, do you think accidents sell newspapers? What do you think Pulitzer and Hearst and their publications went with? They went with subterfuge. So this is just one example. Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo, question mark. No word of possible accident, right? So the newspapers were inundated with titles like this. And this is what people were reading constantly. Now, eventually the US declared war on Spain, and the US declared war on Spain, Spanish-American War began. This was one of the catalysts, the explosion of the USS Maine. Now, there was no evidence that proved that, but this is what we went with. And I'm not saying that these newspaper articles were the catalyst. However, public support was there. Seeing Spain being blamed in the newspapers every single day by publications from Hearst and publications by Pulitzer gave support behind this war. To this day, we do not know how the USS Maine exploded, whether it was a foreign entity or if it was simply an accident. Moving on, we have radio. 1930s, huge media. So in 1938, Orson Welles' radio personality did a dramatization of the 1898 novel War of the Worlds by Orson Welles, or H.G. Wells, rather. And this was a simulation of a normal evening radio broadcast that, but in the novel War of the Worlds, you have the aliens from Mars invading Earth. So at the start of this broadcast, they said this is a dramatization, this is completely fictional. But as people tuned in, they heard this radio broadcast of New Jersey exploding, that the Martians were invading us. And people allowed their emotions to overpower their common sense. Media had a real hold on people. And as you can tell from some of these newspaper headlines, people believed this radio broadcast to be true. So what does this mean? What are the implications today? These examples I've given you are 80, 120 years old. Has media changed? Is it the same? Say both. So there have been some major changes between the traditional media of print and television and advertisement and this new social media. It really has been a game changer. So some major changes: reach. With the new advent of social media, it allows for a much more global reach. You can have a news story and have anyone around the world have access to it. That was not the case prior to social media. Also, the amount of time it takes from story to be created and then published is far less. So not as much time, things are much more instant, and in some cases, it actually is even broadcasted live. Also, the direction. So the traditional media would have been created in a top-down approach. You would have had a small group of people. Typically, they're going to be cis-het white men dominating what gets released by the media. Also dominating what gets consumed by the general population. Now, this is still the case for traditional media platforms. It's produced by a small group, consumed by the masses. Hopefully, it's a little more diverse than it was in the 1890s. But what really has changed is there is now a two-way street. The average person can both create and share media themselves. They don't necessarily need these huge media moguls to do it for them. So it's a fantastic thing, right? It sounds like a democratization of information. And in some ways it is, but there are going to be some negative implications as well. So it's no longer just top down, it's also bottom up. Anyone with an internet connection and a device can create and share media. Again, though, anyone can create and share media. So there are positives and negatives. Some of the positives, like I said, democratization of information. It also gives a global platform to minority and marginalized voices and allows them to share their experiences in a way that they did not necessarily have access to prior to the advent of social media. Fantastic. But there are also some negatives. It may appear to be more global. It may appear to be democratized. However, things like algorithms and the way social media works can hamper that. So the information people engage with when they're on social media tends to be information that they already believe in. The algorithms feed you information that is in line with your interests and your beliefs. It's harder to actually interact with information that is outside of these beliefs. It also depends on your connections, the people you actually know and connect with online. Oftentimes, people are drawn to other people that are similar to them. And this is the case in person with real people and also with our interactions on social media. What ends up happening is you create like a silo effect where you only hear voices that are similar to yours and you don't necessarily grow. So even though it looks global, your interactions are not necessarily global. And just like the 19th century, what are the types of information that get shared and go viral? Things that are sensationalized, right? The things that catch your attention, the things that create emotions and bring up your feelings and whatnot. It's not necessarily just the facts that get shared, right? So even though we think we're exposed to a lot more information, really we're exposed to things that are still in line with that things that we already believe. So news outlets still use this emotion to get to us. So looking at these headlines, they use emotionally charged language and images. They want us to feel something. And anger and fear is an emotion that has a lot of effect. So looking at this, these images, we see images of rioting and looting, and that's the language that they use. These are protests, but they pick the images that are the most violent and the most destructive, even if that's a minority of what is actually happening. And because we communicate in headlines, this is what you see on social media. you only get the pictures and the headline. You don't necessarily get the full article because so many people don't actually go into the article itself. They share the headline that they read because it angered them, or it caused fear, or it caused some emotional reaction. So what are the real world implications for this? With this new media, social media, and this ease of access, the ability to share information very quickly and with a lot of different people, brings about questions of our media literacy. And there's some evidence to show that a lack of media literacy has some real implications. So 55% of US adults use social media for news. And as we said, what gets shared on social media? The headlines that grab our attention, the sensationalized stories. So we're only getting a small picture of the whole when we do this. 47% of US adults in a poll from AP believed it's difficult to know when information they encounter on social media specifically is true. Does this stop people from sharing it though? Evidence proves to the contrary. So we admit that maybe we're not the best at evaluating information, but it doesn't stop us from proliferating. Now, that's US adults. Gen X or Gen Z, the new generation, people that are currently in high school, they are far more tech savvy, right? So we would think that maybe their ability to understand information that is predominantly online is greater. Evidence to the contrary of that as well. So in a study by Stanford University, they took 3,400 and some high school students and had them do information literacy tasks. And this is some of their findings that came out of it. So 96% of these high school students, 3,400 of them from all across the United States, various socioeconomic statuses, public schools, private schools, predominantly white, predominantly Black, 96% of them, when presented a website on fossil fuels and fossil fuel data, failed to discover that the publisher of that website had ties to the fossil fuel industry, perhaps giving it a biased approach. 96% of them. That information was available very readily on the About tab of that website. 66% of them were unable to distinguish a news story from an ad. And over 50% of them, when presented an anonymously posted video on Facebook, believed that it showed voter fraud in the United States, even though when you investigate it, that video was recorded in Russia. So now we have the ease of access, the ease of dissemination with social media. Bring in some of the technological advances that we have, and we have some real concerns regarding media literacy. So this is a chart from the Washington Post, and they created it specifically regarding video, but I think it's applicable to both video and photo. So they have, when it comes to misinformation with regard to video, they break it down into 3 categories. So missing context. What that means is the video or the photo, in my case, the framing lacks or mistakes the context of the situation, okay? Then you have deceptive editing, where things are cut out, rearranged, or edited in a way so that the message is skewed. And then finally, malicious transformation. So malicious transformation is where part or all of the video has been doctored. It could be completely made up, but it's heavily, heavily edited. So here are some examples. So this is a Twitter post, and it's a video that shows excessive flooding. And according to the tweet, it says, sharing on social media with the president, here is Miami International Airport. Now, this was September of 2017. The video actually portrays flooding that happened in Mexico City a few weeks prior. So this video was presented as Miami International Airport, but in reality, it's not. So the context was incorrect. Here's another one, another Twitter post. Shows what is represented is, according to the tweet, rockets being fired into Israel from Gaza. Now, if you investigate, this video that was posted in 2019 is actually a video recorded in 2014 in Belarus. Completely different country, completely different time period, but not being represented as such. Now, editing. This is an example. It's a little less serious than some of the other ones. We have a video on the left and a video on the right, or photo on the left, photo on the right. Kris Jenner and Chef Gordon Ramsay. The one on the left was posted by Kris Jenner or her social media team, and the one on the right was posted by Gordon Ramsay. If you look at this same photo, they look very different. The one on the left was heavily edited. Wrinkles were taken out, lines were softened. Now, this is innocuous. This is not as damaging as some of the other ones, but it just shows what can be done and what we encounter on a day-to-day basis. This is so common. How many times have you posted a photo after kind of going, oh, I see that I have some frizz here, let me take that out. This is commonplace. A little more serious rather, we have a photo on the left, which was taken for Teen Vogue, and shows Emma Gonzalez, survivor of the Parkland mass shooting. And she's tearing up a Target for a gun. However, gun rights activists took this image and pushed it out online and altered what she was tearing up. She is now tearing up, in their version, the US Constitution. Has a far different implication, doesn't it? What about malicious? So I'm gonna get out of my presentation really quick, and we're gonna watch a quick video. Posted on Instagram.
Futures. I owe it all to Spectre. Spectre showed me that whoever controls the data controls the future.
I'm gonna replay it because the first.
Imagine this for a second. One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data, all their secrets, their lives, their futures. I owe it all to Spectre. Spectre showed me that whoever controls the data controls the future.
Sounds pretty legit, a little scary perhaps. Would you have said that that video was doctored? Most people would say no. That voice is not actually the voice of Mark Zuckerberg. So it was completely edited. And the reason it was created was to show Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg specifically how this type of thing is so easy to do and how you can take the background of the video and add audio and make it sound pretty legitimate and have that person say anything. President Barack Obama, there was also a very famous deep fake of him as well. So this is something that we're seeing. Technology is allowing this. Finally, some beautiful pictures of people. They might look like the person sitting next to you or your neighbor, but they are completely computer generated. These people do not exist. So we have the technology and the capability to do so much. However, and we have the means through social media to share these things very easily and readily. You can see where the implications could be a little bit dangerous, and that not knowing how to interact with media in a more critical way could pose some real risks. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Nancy Weissman, who's going to give you more information on how to critically engage with media.
Okay, so Nick is arranging things for a second here. So hello to everybody out there. Does anybody have any questions so far? And hi to all of my colleagues that I haven't seen in so long. How is everybody? I guess I have to look here. All good, thumbs up. Questions so far? Hi, Sam. Monica. All right. Okay, so I'm a librarian. I'm at West Shore campus. I've been with the college for many years. And what we do is we teach how to evaluate information. Information literacy is our big wheelhouse. And we want to make sure that what we're looking at, we're evaluating for reliability and credibility. So I'm going to kind of lean on that aspect of the presentation and ask questions as you see fit. So I'm going to talk about, I gotta move this. Okay. Sorry. Learning curve here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about bias first, because as we look at information and what we saw in Megan's part of the presentation is that there's definitely bias out there. And bias is not necessarily a bad thing. We kind of all have bias within us. Bias is a tendency towards or against something or someone or some situation. And it can be a positive bias. I have a bias to get up early and exercise every day. I think everyone should get up early and get their heart going. Or you can have a bias towards eating a vegetarian diet. I can have a bias towards community colleges. I think that they're the best place for people to come and learn and grow. And let's see, I also have a bias towards Playhouse Square. It's the greatest theater district in the United States. I'm also a redcoat at Playhouse Square, so I have this bias towards it. So bias is one thing that we do need to consider, but also as we're looking at information, we have to look at the value and the reliability of the information. So there's going to be a bias, but then we also have to determine the value and the reliability. So what is value? Anybody out in the audience want to throw out your definitions of value? Okay.
Beliefs.
Beliefs, okay. Anybody else? Value is a worth, right? It can be measured in usefulness or importance or merit, and it definitely can also be a belief. And then what is reliability?
You could trust it.
Yeah, we look at reliability as something being dependable, that we have faith or we have confidence in something. So you have this value and reliability, but then how do we determine the value and the reliability of something? So on my little word cloud here, I have things that we can look at to start honing in on how good a source might be as far as it being valuable and reliable. So the first thing that we would look at is a fact. A fact is not subjective. A fact is an objectable piece of information. So the fact right now is I'm standing in Studio 101 at Metro Campus and presenting to you. It is also November 8th. That's a fact, right? Or did I mess that up? Yes, it's November 8th. I have blue eyes. That's a fact. So facts are concrete. The next thing that we have is you can take a fact and you can start to analyze facts, okay? And that's analysis. And analysis is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what we should do as researchers. We should gather information, and then we should analyze the information and determine what our truths are from looking at that information. So you have facts, you have analysis. You also can come across opinion. Okay, so we all have opinion. Opinion is a view or a judgment formed about something. Again, I had an opinion there about Playhouse Square, right? That's my bias. My opinion is it's a really good place to go. So you have fact, you have opinion, you have analysis. You can also have persuasion, right? Sometimes we want to try and convince someone or something of our viewpoint. And we're going to see that a lot in the media. We're trying to be persuaded a lot. We see this in propaganda too. And sometimes propaganda is really good and sometimes it's really bad. It's trying to force you to see something and only one viewpoint of something. And then we also have pure fabrication. So something that's a lie. It's totally made up. So let's take a look at something that's really current, and we're going to examine the facts and the analysis and the opinions. I'm sorry, guys. This is my first time here. How did I make that go away? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so look at this. What's the fact on this screen? I got a couple facts up there. Cleveland Browns beat Cincinnati Bengals 41-16 yesterday, and that is a fact, right? We can't dispute that. That happened. It's also a fact that we have a 5-4 record now. Another fact is that Baker Mayfield completed 14 of 21 passes in the game. Okay, all facts. Are we good with that? What might be the analysis here? And excuse me, all you football fans, if I didn't pick great analyses, but when asked about the number of Burrow's interceptions, offensive coordinator Brian Callahan said this week he wasn't concerned, blah, 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 blah. It's his analysis. And when you think about analysis of sporting events, if you go to ESPN or you watch any of that stuff, they analyze the crap out of this stuff all day long. So we have facts, we have analysis. We also have an opinion on here. What's the opinion? You guys can see that on the screen. The defense have some serious soul searching to do over the bye week, to say the least. Okay, whomever Anarumo is, that's his opinion on the game or how the Bengals are playing. Persuasion. Watching this game, you might be persuaded to continue to watch the Browns, where some people watch the Browns and they lose and they say, I will never watch them again. And then total fabrication is we can look towards Aaron Rodgers, who maybe it's unfair to say he flat out lied, but he fabricated. He said that he got immunized to COVID when he really was not vaccinated. So there's my quick and dirty examples of how we can look at fact analysis and so forth. So there is a tool that I have been using in my teaching for the past several years, and it's called the media bias chart. And this chart looks at the information sources that we consume basically online in websites, podcasts, video, and it scales them based on the bias of the viewpoint and then the facts, the analysis, the opinions, the persuasion, and the fabrication associated. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go into the live media bias chart, and wish me luck with this, guys. No?
Just hit escape.
Oh. Okay. So this is the media bias chart, and it's at fontsmedia.com. You could just Google media bias chart. And I will say with the caveat that there are several media charts out there, media bias charts, and they're not the send all, save all for how we evaluate. They're just a tool. So because it's here doesn't mean that this is an absolute. It's really, you have to kind of look at more than one piece of information, maybe more than one bias chart, and be a good consumer of information. But what you'll see on the media bias chart is that I don't think I can't. Anyhow, you have a bias on the bottom, and you have a political bias. You can go to the left or to the right, and then you start at the top of the chart with original fact reporting. Up here to fact reporting, to analysis or high variation of reliability, opinion or high variation in reliability, selective or incomplete story, unfair persuasion, containing misleading information, containing inaccurate information. So you have the horizontal is political bias, and then the vertical is how we're going to rate it on value and reliability. And you can see that the sources in the green box here are deemed most reliable for news because they're looking at original fact reporting or fact reporting. Then you have sources in a yellow box that are not liable for news, but might be high in analysis and opinion content. And that doesn't mean it's bad. You just have to understand that it's being analyzed. And then we also want to know who is analyzing it. We have then the next category where we have some reliability issues or extremism. And that is going to be in the orange box, which is hitting the middle of the chart. And then at the bottom of the chart, you have a red box that has serious reliability issues and or extremism. Now, the way that the pieces of information are evaluated by the media bias chart, there's a 5-step evaluation process, and each piece of information is evaluated by a panel of 40 analysts. And those 40 analysts make up left, center, and right. So this is not necessarily a left-leaning or a right-leaning tool. They try very hard to get the opinions and the perspective from analysts that look at information from all 3 sides. So with this said, we're going to take a look at 3 articles and together try and figure out where these articles might land on the media bias chart. And it's probably pretty obvious, but looking through the articles, we're going to pull out some things that would be good tellers as to where these things lie. So the first article we have is called Critical Race Theory, the Concept Dividing the U.S. And this is coming from the BBC World News. Okay, and we see that there's a little picture of a boy holding a sign. And then the first 2 paragraphs, they're clearly pointing out for supporters, it's an important framework for understanding the way systemic racism can perpetuate discrimination and disadvantage. And for opponents, it's a subversive plan to indoctrinate young Americans to reject their country and its history. So right off the bat, it's giving us 2 viewpoints. Sorry, I can turn it a little bit. Okay, so we have that. And then we go on to see what is critical race theory. So we're getting background information, and it's pointing to Derek Bell, Harvard University's first permanently appointed Black law professor, who was the one that actually coined the term critical race theory and why he thought it was important. And then we see down here, oops, sorry, folks. The George Floyd murder caused this whole nation to take a look at race and racism. And I think there was a broad recognition that something was amiss, says so-and-so and so-and-so. But they're pointing out that the George Floyd murder was really the impetus to cause this look into critical race theory. And then we have pictures that are showing kind of an anti-critical race theory movement. Then we have information about how critical race theory is taught, and we have a picture of Derek Bell, and it talks about the confluence, how it's been influenced. And as we scroll down more, and this is here, it's talking about this author, Anastasia Higginbotham, and she has argued that any place where there are white people has violent white supremacy embedded into it, and she's not shy about labeling her discussions on racist critical race theory. So it's saying that, those who are proponents also are a little, out there way to the left. How it became a national controversy. Now it's pointing to a conservative documentary filmmaker named Chris Rufo. he's been pretty active on PBS. He's not necessarily he's not necessarily a bad person, but he's trying very hard to light the fire here about critical race theory. If I can get back up to the quote I want to. He said here, the goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. So he's stirring the pot. He's one of these people that, while he has done good work and he's probably not a stupid person and he could be very smart, he has an agenda and he is definitely pushing it. So anyway, this particular article is looking at literally both sides of the issue, okay? So that's the first article, and this is from the BBC, okay? And it's pretty thorough. Here's a perspective from a Black college student who is certainly not paying to sit in a classroom to be told that he's a helpless victim, he or she. Regardless of how hard I try or how hard I work, that will never be enough because racism will always win. So this is a conservative activist who is clearly Black. So this article is just giving you this well-rounded picture of what critical race theory is. The next one is hidden underneath here. Get this. Okay, got it. Okay, so here's the next one. And what do you guys think of this one based on the just the title of the article? I'm usually one to say never judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you can pretty much tell the tone of an article or a book based on the headlines. And this one is The Radical Reshaping of K-12 Public Education, Critical Race Theory, and Woke Academics. I didn't even understand what woke was until I started preparing for this. This is part 3 of a series on extremist indoctrination in America's schools. So clearly, this is going to be on the right, okay? It doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. It just, we can tell right off the bat, this is a right-leaning bias. We can also see that there are pictures. So we have something here with Donald Trump in it. And then we see here a form of reverse racism, not only dominating the national conversation, but also quickly becoming the bedrock of teacher training and student academics. Now, that could be really, if you read this article, and we can share the links with you, you guys can kind of see sweeping generalizations going on here. And they're talking about defining critical race theory here, which they do, but they're taking their definition from Encyclopedia Britannica. Again, it's not that it's a bad source of information, but the previous article that we saw actually went to the root where critical race theory was actually developed. Then it goes on to throw in this bit about how a Marxist school use concepts, and they're trying to link a Marxist school's concepts to critical race theory. So they're planting that seed of this is a Marxist, communist type of agenda here. Because it's so quiet with you guys out there. Anybody questions or anything yet? So as we keep going down here, we can read about critical race theory. And again, these facts could all be correct. It's how they're presenting the facts here. Critical race theory entered into our schools in the form of critical race theory based teacher training. The emotional backdrop was a nation in disarray following a dark summer of violent protests, the defacing and destruction of historic statues, looting and burning of police vehicles and buildings following the death of George Floyd. Okay, so this is just, it does mention George Floyd, but the death of George Floyd, okay? Preempted by the fact that there was violent protests, defacing and destruction of historic statues, looting and burning, and so on. So again, if you were to look through this article, you're clearly going to find instances of right-leaning thought. It's a very long article. They are pulling out parts of bills, Senate bills. They're talking about states pushing back. Here's a little ad here where they're calling the right prescription the kamikaze party with a picture of Nancy Pelosi. So you guys get it. This is kind of a right-leaning article. And let's go to the next one. Okay, the next one is from a publication called Vox. And it begins with what the hysteria over critical race theory is really all about. Conservatives have launched a growing disinformation campaign around the academic concept. It's an attempt to push back against progress. Okay, so yeah, so not necessarily a loaded title, but if we scroll down here, we do have some images that are very flattering to the right. So you have Trump and some militia, and then you have an elephant slinging mud, and you see some protesting there. So we are getting, you know, some bias in here. And as we keep going, we can read about critical race theory. This one talks about how it's been created decades ago by legal scholars. It's an academic framework. Over the past 6 months, Republicans are trying to stymie educational discussions about race, blah, blah, blah. And then when it wants to pull your attention to something, notably that is a Fox News story. So this is completely looking at like blaming the right here. This Fox News story fashioned critical theory as a boogeyman. So that's like loaded language there. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, we're talking about, they're showing some states that have proposed legislative bans on anti-racist teaching and training. There's bills. Again, when they want to like draw your attention to something that it's being bad, this is a right agenda, they're bad people, we don't like Trump, they're bolding Trump's name. And this isn't even an article that anything that Trump said, it's pointing you to a todayshow.com article referencing Trump's patriotic education bill. So as you can see, you know, we've got little tricks on each side. Here's what critical race theory actually is. They go back into the history of it. And then they're going to talk about, you know, 5 points. It's very thorough. And what it's come to stand for. And here we have the backlash began last summer as America was trying to reckon with racism in the wake of police killings of Black Americans, including Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And millions of people in major cities and small towns protested for racial justice and helped change public opinion about racism. So this one says that George Floyd was killed by the police, which he was. That's a fact. The article from the BBC said that George Floyd was murdered. But the article from the American Spectator just said that he died. The death of George Floyd. So anyhow, you guys get the gist that we have 3 different articles that are looking at the same topic, but coming from different perspectives. So what do you do as a student or as a consumer of information? How do you know if you know what's right and what's wrong, and how do we go ahead and evaluate this? So you can look at the media bias chart. And we can kind of, you know, say, oh, well, it was to the right. And, you know, some of it was original fact reporting. But here, this interactive chart, you can actually type in the names of the publications and see where they fall on the chart. So if we put American Spectator in here, we see that American Spectator is clearly falling. It's a right bias. It's not all the way right. And it's not necessarily containing misleading or inaccurate or fabricated information. Some articles that have been reviewed do. You can see these little gray dots. And some articles are actually up here in the most reliable for news, and some, there's one here that's right in the middle. It's a balance. But for the most part, the American Spectator is looking at information or presenting information with a political bias to the right, and kind of in that middle range where it could be extremism, it could be serious extremism. We need to be a little bit careful with what we're reading there. The next one we looked at was Vox. Oops. So here's Vox. Vox is centered, it is to the left. It's not far out to the left, but it's to the left for sure. It falls basically within the reliable for news, but looking more on, sorry about that, looking more towards analysis of information. There's some variation in reliability, but it looks like it's a pretty decent source. There's some articles that are up here under fact reporting. There's some articles that are even to the left, to the right of the political spectrum. So that's Vox. And then the last one that we looked at, or the first one actually, was the BBC. And the BBC is right here. Oops, let me do that one more time. You can actually put in up to 5 publications. So here's the BBC. The BBC is actually mostly politically centered. Some of the stuff is leaning left, but for the most part, you can't tell here, but most of the dots are along the center. There's a couple to the right. There's more to the left. So we do have to admit that there's more to the left there. But this is going to be mostly fact reporting and some comparison and an analysis. So any questions on that media bias chart or anything that I've gone over? Those are the 3 links to the articles. There's also some red flags that we can pay attention to when we're looking at media online. For instance, I chose three articles from 3 resources that are, they're good resources for the most part. They weren't blatant or flagrant or really insulting, but sometimes you have to make sure that if something's explicitly stating that it's telling you the truth, it's probably not. If it contains short, conclusory opinion statements, it's probably not the greatest resource. If something's listed as opposed to you as a bunch of questions and you're supposed to answer them, it's probably not really good information. I'm putting the burden on you, again, to answer the question. It's not going to be great information. Asking you to prove a negative, which is often impossible. That's another thing that you want to look out for. Suggesting insidious plot by someone, that's never a good thing. And elevating the credibility of one expert who goes against the consensus of the entire expert peer group. Aaron Rodgers, right? So we just have to be careful about that. And claims that are being taken down for promoting misinformation as censorship, therefore proves that taking them down is actually true. So anyway, just things to consider. There's so much out there that we really want to be careful about how we're looking at things. And did you want to finish this last slide? I'm not quite sure what it is.
Oh, it's just the resources.
Okay, and then here is our resources. Any questions for either Megan or myself?
I think I have one if I can chime in. And then, John, do you have any questions from the web chat?
We haven't seen any on chat. This has been a really good reminder, though, that just because something is an analysis, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's free of bias, right? So it can analyze something, but it can still be influenced by, your own political leanings or stuff like that. So I mean, Megan, Nancy, as research professionals, I mean, would your advice be to only look for things that provide analysis that usually live in that center, or it's a good idea to read things on both the right and the left to get both sides? Like, what's the smartest way of being a consumer of information, especially with stuff that is being driven by race and those controversial subjects like that?
I think it's really important to be a well-informed consumer of information is to look at each side of an issue. Because what we saw with the critical race theory, there are valid arguments on the right as to like the whole purpose behind critical race theory and what it's trying to do. And it's also people's truths. So it's important to understand that people do believe this, but why? The why do they believe that is also something that we need to question and maybe dig a little deeper. Like how did this come to be? So it is important to look at both sides.
Especially when it's something that you are emotional, you have an emotional reaction to. Reading as much on both sides helps to not only, it gives you information about what other people feel and other people believe, and it also helps to better inform your own beliefs and provide you evidence for ensuring that the things that you do believe to be true are in fact true. Yes, Matt?
And I think my question's on the same wavelength. Looking at the media bias chart and seeing how everything lined up in terms of left versus right, does being media literate require that you take a moderate approach? Or can you take a stand that might put you on that chart, one side or the other, but it's still based in media literacy? Yeah, I think the other thing on top of that is if you really lean on that taking both sides approach, what is the middle? And do both sides have equal validity?
Correct, yeah.
And I don't necessarily think it's taking both sides. You can still have your own opinion and you could be very left or very right on an issue, but you have to understand that your viewpoint is not the only viewpoint, and that there is validity around an issue, and that you have to understand where other people are coming from, and that as long as you are basing your assertions on facts, that's where media literacy really holds weight.
For sure, yeah. And you have to understand that with bias, I mean, bias is cultural and it's situational and it's things that we have grown up with. So you have to consider, right? I mean, people, it's their truth, whether or not that truth is factually correct, you have to understand why that truth came into being. So if you want the full picture, it's important to understand both sides of the coin.
And I think the more we surround ourselves with people who are different than us, and that our social circle, whether it be on social networks or in person, is not homogenous. It's not, everybody doesn't look like me. Everybody's not a single or a white female in her 30s, a singular person like that. Then that's when we get these different perspectives and we interact with people that are different than from us, we grow. And our perspectives grow and change and evolve and hopefully become more robust and more reflective of reality, not just our reality.
So we just had a really good question come in through chat. Is this chart biased toward big media? If I want to be lazy, I would just read the articles from the media companies at the apex. So, you know, there's that immediate question, but you know, there's also, like, I know there's a website called allsides.com where people from all over the world can basically weigh in and vote on how left or right a site is versus the one that you guys shared, which has a little bit more, I guess, scientific analysis behind it. So what's your response there? I mean, is the chart that you showed biased toward big media?
I don't know that it's necessarily biased toward big media, because that's maybe the resources that we pointed out were a little bit more big media. But at this point, I mean, I'd have to go back into media bias chart and see how many publications and information outlets they're actually looking at. So yeah, I mean, yes, I'm sure that there's some kind of a bias in the media bias chart. It's just maybe hard to dodge that.
Well, also think about it this way. Who is producing the greatest number of articles or podcasts? They tend to be entities that have the economic money behind them so that they are big media. So I would say that possibly there is a bias in that regard, but I don't necessarily think it's necessarily in the chart. I think it's in the way that media, the way media works.
So could a way around that maybe be relying on like Black Twitter, for example?
You don't know what Black Twitter is, John?
Well, so I had a coworker who basically enlightened me that there are all of these subgroups within Twitter that are representative of various demographics within our society, where they're basically crowdsourcing news and information within that particular group. So, you know, it might be comprised of things, you know, from big media or from social media, but it's news and information that's pertinent to that particular group. So, you know, would that be another way that people might be able to try and consume information? I guess taking a separate approach outside of just looking at the chart and relying on it.
Well, definitely. The chart is not the be all end all. It's one of many, many tools that we have at our disposal. So any avenue in which you are interacting with information in a critical manner and not just going off of your own instincts, your own feelings, but consulting external communities, especially communities that are invested in the specific topics that you're doing research on, is always best practice. Relying on one singular tool, even if it's a really good tool, that's not best practice, no matter what.
And we had another question come in. How can we help our friends and family members who maybe have a hard time with media literacy and tend to believe things without verifying the facts?
Oof. The $1 million question.
Right. They should take an information literacy course. I think encouraging them to look at, you know, the other side, or maybe the centrist side. So the article that we looked at from the BBC started straight out with, here's what the supporters think, here's what the people that don't support it think. They were giving a very kind of an unbiased viewpoint. And then, yeah, I mean, we're consuming what we want to consume. So we joined Facebook, and we, based on algorithms, are only getting the information that we're interested in. So yeah, it's, you know, how do you break people free of that habit of just looking at what you want to look at or what you want to believe?
I also think asking questions, like, oh, like if they share or they say something that sounds like it might not necessarily be based in truth, ask them, oh, where did you hear that? Because I heard this.
Right. Yes. I always say, where'd you get that?
Trying to do it in a non-confrontational manner, which sometimes is really, really difficult because we know our truths. And if we're convinced of something and we have evidence for it, having somebody say that the sky is not blue, it makes you question things. So trying to keep as calm as possible, showing them information that maybe counters it sometimes can be helpful, but sometimes if it's presented in a way that is confrontational, that can cause more problems. And really people then start to dig in more into their beliefs. So I like the questioning approach of, I didn't know that. Where did you hear that? Because I heard this.
Sounds like you're doing it right.
Yeah, looking at multiple sources is always a fantastic way to verify information. And maybe looking at one that you know leans right, one that you know leans left, and kind of being able to look at both of those sides, but also just multiple sources in general, especially with things that are really like outlandish or sound outlandish, verifying that if it happens in multiple sources, there's more of a chance of it actually being true.
I had a question on that wavelength.
Yes.
Would you say there's merit in trying to bring in some foreign newspapers when you're trying to keep up with American news, like BBC, because then there might be less investment in
Correct.
one political party or the other?
Absolutely. Looking at international news can, because it takes away a bias, right? If they are of a different country, then they're not as invested in the day-to-day workings of what's going on in the United States. So they are less biased towards what's actually happening, theoretically.
Yeah, even the you know, we're such a divisive country right now that even people think that you know, the liberal media and even NPR is, you know, too liberal. So, which is where I always thought was like that centrist. They present both sides of the topic, but looking at maybe CNN and Fox News and seeing how they're both presenting a headline, and then going to the BBC and seeing how they're presenting that headline, or NPR or PBS is also another one of those very in the middle sources of information.
And then just being cognizant of what we are sharing online, making sure that what we're sharing is actual fact. So I have a good story. I was scrolling on Twitter this morning and I saw a picture of Big Bird. And Big Bird had just been immunized against COVID-19. So Sesame Street is using this as a publicity to promote vaccinations. And then there was another tweet that supposedly came from Big Bird, and it was hysterical, but it wasn't actually Big Bird. So it was just somebody took Big Bird's original tweet and changed the words. And I almost sent it to my husband because I thought it was funny. Now, it was, again, innocuous, no one was going to live or die based off of that information. But even I, who's supposedly an information expert, I was like, oh, that's hysterical. Let me hit send. And luckily I stopped and I was like, let me just verify this, because that would be the irony on my day that I'm doing media literacy. I share something that's not true. But thinking before we post and share for anything, whether it's trivial like Sesame Street and Big Bird, or if it's something major that is going to determine how somebody votes. Any other questions?
Are you guys able to see the chat at this point?
I can't.
Okay, so we got one more. I learned a lot, and this is a topic that continues to cause an uproar in today's society. Everyone looks at the media differently, whether with a bias or unbiased opinion, and how we receive the information affects us. So I think that's actually a pretty good closer, because yeah, I mean, how we receive media, whether it's from a group that we tend to agree with or not agree with, or the type of media, it certainly is going to inform how we take information in. So, but We're I think 13 minutes past, so I think we're about at time, Matt. So do you want to close it out here?
Technically, we could go all the way to 3:30, but no, we will close this. I first want to thank Megan and Nancy so much. I mean, this is a topic I've thought about a lot myself as a professor of history, but yet I learned quite a bit today myself. I also want to thank Nick Yoho, who just told me his position, but I'm just going to say tech guru now because I've already forgotten. But he showed up here in Studio 101 at 12:30 and has been with us all the way till now, making sure that everything runs smoothly. So I thank you very much, Nick. I also just want to add that a number of the questions at the end lead us perfectly to our next workshops. The one that we have coming up this Wednesday, also in Studio 101 and on WebEx, is emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. So especially the one question that somebody had about how do I talk to relatives who don't quite understand this whole media literacy thing. There's going to be a lot of overlap when we get into emotional intelligence, right? Seeing where somebody's coming from and understanding the best way to interact with that person once you have a better idea of who they are and where they're coming from and what their biases might be. And also on a shared wavelength, a week from today, and this one will be just entirely virtual, we will have Derek Williams talking about spin zones and echo chambers, which, if I remember correctly, Nancy brought up today, and we'll cover that in depth. I feel awkward mentioning the next one, which is in a week and a half, but that's because I am one of the presenters. That's when we get into how history is brought into all of this polarization and how it's used and abused. So I'm very happy with the turnout we had today. I really look forward to seeing as many of you again as possible on Wednesday and next week, and please spread the word as well. Right? If anybody wants to hang out a little bit longer, I'm going to stop the recording now, but we can leave the connection up.